Welcome back, folks, to this series of videos on progressivism. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So today we're going to talk about some specific reforms in state government and local government, and some other like key political ideas that we're going to discuss for a few minutes. So, couple of things I want you to make note of here: the recall, the initiative, referendum, recall, direct primary. These are important ideas. You need to memorize what these things are because these things could show up on a test. So you need to know what these are. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and jot that stuff down because that's going to be important stuff to know. Okay. By this point, we should know what women's suffrage is. So please, please, hopefully we know what that is. Uh, but also, there were a lot of social and economic reforms, not just reforms, political reforms, but also social and economic. So we've talked about some of these already. I'm going to talk about them in more detail in this lesson. So we get a lot of laws that start regulating daily life, like where people live, how people work, where they work, how long they can work, who can work, stuff like that. Where they can, what kind of living conditions can exist, what kinds of products can be produced, what protections are there for your average American, like in meat, for example. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let's just talk about what they were trying to do. Okay, this is what progressives were trying to do. They wanted to root out entrenched corruption. Okay, they made it their business to know as much about politics as politicians so that they could challenge the politicians when they were corrupt, right? And because of this knowledge, they were actually better equipped to combat political corruption in this context. So they wanted to get government back to the people, quote unquote, and this is part of how they wanted to make that happen. Higher corporate taxes, stricter regulations on utility and railroad companies, and a massive reform of political culture in this country, not just at the national level, but also at the state and local levels as well. So, what did they engage in? All of these things. They engaged in all of these things. Massive antitrust initiatives. We'll talk about some of those. Right to vote for women, public education, unions, industrial reforms, and then more democratic government at the state and local levels. And that's what that stuff is, which we talked about just a couple of seconds ago on the previous slide, right at the beginning, where the definitions for those things are there. You need to know what these things are. Really, really important. So, what were some of the major organizations and groups? These were, I mean, just some of these were the most major, but these are just some of the organizations and groups that were progressively minded. And on the next two slides, I have definitions of each of these things. My guys, I'm going to give you what I call a little cheat sheet, a little study guide. I'll give that to you in class, but so here's the first round of that. What was the social gospel movement? This was involving churches, mostly evangelical Protestants, or Protestants, but also a lot of Catholic organizations were involved in this as well. This need for social justice, that we should apply Christian ethics to social and economic problems. We talked about muckrakers already. The Settlement House movement was like early social work, right? So they created like community centers for in immigrant neighborhoods to help immigrants acclimate to life in the U.S. and learn the language, job skills, education, childcare, things like that. You also have the National Consumers League that monitored business. You have the Women's Trade Union League that urged women to unionize. And then you have the National Child Labor Committee, which campaigned against child labor. You have the Country Life Movement, who wanted to modernize rural social and economic conditions so that people in rural areas had the same resources that folks in cities did. Of course, we know all about suffrage, so that organization led the movement to give women the right to vote. You have a lot of municipal reformers, and these are like local level folks that sought to change the activities and structure of government, and conservationists. And they wanted efficient management and regulation of natural resources, and to stop this uncontrolled development and engage in some preservation. So these are some major laws and constitutional amendments that were passed. Like, look at all those laws and amendments. Like, that's a lot. So what were these things? Well, here you go. Now you can read, you can pause the video, jot all this stuff down because it's really, really important. New York tenement house law should be pretty self-explanatory. The Hepburn Act might not be as obvious as why that's important. Strengthening the Interstate Commerce Commission allowed the federal government to better regulate industry. They had more tools in their toolbox to go after monopolists and to go after robber barons and to just go after corrupt corporations that were sucking the life out of the communities they supposedly serve. So the Hepburn Act was important. Food and Drug Act, this allowed the federal government to regulate food and drugs to make sure that the products were of a good standard, that consumers, when they bought something, they knew what it was they were getting. Dealt with a lot of fraud because, I mean, for a long time, you just had people would just, hang a shingle out and be like, oh, there's this elixir and it will cure your nausea or your anxiety, right? And all it was a bunch of random chemicals that did nothing to actually control any of the symptoms they claimed to control. And there was no one policing this. And so the Pure Food and Drug Act allowed these people, these charlatans, to be put out of business. And if you were selling something, you couldn't be fraudulent in your selling of it. It had to actually do what you said it would do and not kill people in the process. Like, they would put all kinds of things in this stuff. They put arsenic in there. They put all kinds of stuff, and it was incredibly damaging to a lot of people. The Meat Inspection Act was important. A lot of people got a lot of foodborne illness because meat wasn't handled properly. So it authorized the feds to investigate that. Then, of course, the 16th Amendment, which libertarians and conservatives among us may not like that so much because it authorized the federal income tax, right? But if you want to expand the role of government, that's going to cost more money. You got to find a way to get revenue so that the government can afford to do all the things that you want it to do now. So the federal income tax was necessary in order for these reforms to go through. And then, of course, we have the 17th Amendment that mandated the direct election of senators as opposed to state legislatures electing senators. So this brought the process closer to the people. Whether or not that was a good idea is something we can discuss in class. But that happened in 1913. So those are some key, major groups and major laws and amendments that went through during the Progressive Era that you should be aware of. Oh, wait, I forgot. There's more. Oh, there's more. Okay. So we have the Underwood-Simmons tariff, lower tariff rates, so it allowed for freer trade. It also actually assigned the first income tax in after the amendment, the 16th Amendment was passed. Federal Reserve Act established the Federal Reserve System to supervise banking and provide for a national currency. This is going to eventually help the United States economy stay a lot more even and level, as opposed to like super high highs and then super low lows. Kind of evens us out a little bit and stabilizes the United States economy. You have the Federal Trade Commission Act, established the FTC. So the FTC had the authority to bring charges again to go after businesses that were violating the law. Keating-Owing Act and directly prohibited child labor, which is great. 18th Amendment, this was dumb. I mean, I don't know, find someone who doesn't think this was dumb because it didn't work at all. You know what we got from Prohibition? The mafia, folks. We got organized crime. It didn't stop people from drinking, and it got us organized crime. So I would think most people would agree it was kind of a failure. Just flip it. Then, of course, the 19th Amendment, yayness. It's why us women get to vote. So exciting times there. Okay, so big picture conclusions. In the next series of video lessons, I'm going to go and dig deep into the progressive presidents, but this is like big picture conclusions from the era. So you need to understand that the economic crises of the 1890s, in addition to all the excesses of industrialization, really resulted in people being very, very all about reform. They were all about it. We have to fix this. Most of these reformers came from middle class backgrounds. They wanted to preserve the middle class by getting more people into it. So that was a driving force. A lot of these reformers are from the middle class. Again, you have an emphasis on science, on academia, on research, on experts, running things as opposed to any old person. They resisted ideas that discouraged social change. There was extensive economic reform. And of course, a massive expansion in the role of government generally, but also of the federal government in a much, much larger way. So that concludes part 2. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next video.